Hello everybody, it's Peter Schiff. This is Saturday, June 25th, 2011. Well, the big news of the week came from the Federal Reserve. On Wednesday, they announced that they would continue their 0% interest rate policy for an extended time period, although how long extended means is still up in the air, although Ben Bernanke did later follow up that announcement with what is now becoming a traditional press conference. During that press conference, Ben Bernanke acknowledged that the U.S. economy was in fact slowing down, but he did not announce any type of additional Fed easing in light of that new economic data. The markets did not react well to that announcement. Basically, what's happening is Ben Bernanke is sticking to his script that QE2 will come to an end and that QE3 will not replace it. As a result, the stock market sold off, metals, other commodities sold off, the dollar rallied, and I think you're going to continue to see that dynamic. I think you're going to get weaker economic data, and as long as Ben Bernanke is going to pretend that there is no additional Fed easing coming, then the markets will be under pressure. But I think it's like a giant game of monetary or economic chicken that the Federal Reserve is playing with the markets. I think Ben Bernanke knows that QE3 is coming. He just doesn't want to acknowledge it. He wants to pretend that the U.S. economy is viable, and then when he does announce QE3, or whatever he ends up calling it, it'll be in response to some external event beyond his control that was unforeseen, that is now temporarily derailed an otherwise strengthening recovery, and now the Fed needs to do the QE3 because of these new events. Now again, they might not call it QE3 because of the bad press, but it doesn't matter what they call it. What matters is what they do. And I never liked the term QE, quantitative easing, anyway. I'd rather have it called something more descriptive of what the Fed is actually doing. Maybe debt monetization, maybe inflation creation, or maybe just money printing. But whatever they call it, what matters is what the Fed does. And I believe the Fed is going to continue to ease, to continue to print money, buy government bonds, because that's the only way they're going to keep blowing air into this bubble economy. Of course, the right thing to do is stop, but the Fed is not going to do the right thing. It's going to do the expedient thing. Now, I don't know why people give any credibility to what Ben Bernanke says with respect to the economy anyway. I mean, he's got such a terrible track record. Unless you're going to use him as a contrarian indicator, it makes no sense to pay attention to him. But certainly, I guess if you're trying to figure out what the Fed might do, since he is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, what he thinks is going to happen is certainly relevant to what the Federal Reserve does. But the problem is, how do you know if Ben Bernanke is actually telling the truth and he's just wrong, or whether he's lying? I mean, it's difficult to figure out. I think it's probably a combination of both. One of the ways that you can tell that he's lying, though, is look at what he's saying. First of all, Ben Bernanke said that the economy is weaker than he thought. But he doesn't know why. Right? He's admitting that he can't understand. He's confused as to why the economy is as weak as it is. But then he's confident that the weakness is just temporary. Well, if he doesn't know why the economy is weakening, how is he so sure it's temporary? You see, I know why it's weakening, because I actually said it was going to weaken when he said it was going to strengthen. And because I know why it's weakening, I'm confident that it's not temporary, that it's going to get even weaker. And the fact is, even though Ben Bernanke is now lowering his forecast for the U.S. economy, it's not that he's making a forward-looking forecast. He's simply acknowledging that he was wrong and basically saying the economy is weaker because the data says it's weaker. If you look at what Bernanke is forecasting for the future, he's saying this is just temporary and the economy is going to continue to grow. So he's simply reacting to the data that has already proved him wrong. He's not going out there and predicting a weak economy. He's acknowledging a weak economy, and he's saying it's going to get better. And of course, he's wrong. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And he's also confident that inflation, which is now above his target, is going to come down. And again, another way that you know that Ben Bernanke is lying is in that Q&A, he was specifically asked about inflation, and his response was that he believed that the factors that were pushing inflation up, again, were transitory and that they were going to recede, and he specifically referenced oil prices. And what the Fed chairman said was that oil prices were going to fall, and that falling oil prices were going to work to bring down the core CPI. Now, he acknowledged that oil is not a part of the core, but what he said is that it influenced the core. I think he specifically used airfares as an example, where he said, well, with oil prices coming down, that will help bring airfares down. So he said that falling oil prices were going to work to reduce the core CPI. But wait a minute, like a month or two ago, he said the exact opposite. When oil prices were rising and he was asked if he was worried, he said no, because he thought rising oil prices would actually bring the core down. Now, why would that happen? Well, because consumers were going to have to spend more money on oil. They would have less money to spend on the items that are in the core, and that would put downward pressure on core CPI. So in other words, when oil prices were rising, that was going to bring the core down. And now that oil prices are falling, well, that's also going to bring the core down. Well, you know, he can't have it both ways. It's one or the other. It can't be both. What this proves is that the Fed chairman is simply trying to twist whatever facts there are to his conclusion. He wants to put a benign spin on the data. So it doesn't matter. If oil prices are going up, hey, that's going to bring the core down. If oil prices are going down, well, that's also going to bring the core down. I mean, what's next? If oil prices are going sideways, is he going to come up with some argument why sideways oil prices are also going to bring the core CPI down? You know, a few other interesting items from the press conference that I thought are worth mentioning. Number one, Ben Bernanke came out and said that the Fed had saved us from the pernicious threat of deflation. Now, when Ben Bernanke talks about deflation, he's not referring to asset prices, real estate prices, stock prices. He's really referring to consumer prices, the CPI. And there was never a threat that the CPI was going to fall, that consumer prices were going to go down, as if such a development could even be called a threat. I mean, that would be a good thing. Ben Bernanke is saying that we should be thankful that his money printing saved us from a falling cost of living. That thanks to Ben Bernanke, food didn't get less expensive. Energy didn't get cheaper. Education costs didn't come down. Healthcare costs didn't come down. Insurance premiums didn't come down. We've got Ben Bernanke to thank for all of this. Thanks to Ben Bernanke, instead, oil prices are rising. Food prices are rising. Isn't that great? Now, I think Ben Bernanke is right about one thing. We can thank him for inflation. We can thank him for an increase in the cost of living. Although I don't know that thank is the best word. Maybe blame is a better word. We can blame Ben Bernanke. We can blame the Fed for rising prices. And I think we can also blame the Fed for the fact that the economy is weakening, because it's the Fed's money printing and quantitative easing that is enabling the U.S. government to expand and grow and spend more money to undermine the U.S. economy. Which brings me to another big mistake Ben Bernanke made. Whether he was lying or just completely incompetent, again, is anybody's guess. But he actually said that if we cut the deficit, that if we reduced government spending too quickly now, that it would threaten the economic recovery that he doesn't even understand, because he doesn't understand why it's slowing, but he does think that if we cut government spending too much, that we could destroy jobs and hurt the economy. So in other words, he wants the government to keep spending. Now, not too long ago, I don't know, it was weeks ago, Ben Bernanke was talking about how the biggest threat to the economy is the deficit. Yet now he thinks the biggest threat to the economy is shrinking the deficit. Again, he can't have it both ways, although Ben Bernanke would try to say, well, I think we need to reduce the deficit in the long run, but we need to increase it in the short run to help the economy. Well, wait a minute. If increasing the deficit in the short run helps the economy, why doesn't increasing it in the long run help it even more? The fact of the matter is, the best thing that Congress can do to help the economy is to stop spending our money, to have dramatic across-the-board cuts in government spending. Only then will the private sector have the resources it needs to create a lasting economic recovery. Instead, the Fed is helping Congress to artificially generate a phony recovery that is doomed to fail. And the reason it keeps failing is because it's not real. And the reason Ben Bernanke doesn't understand it's not real is because he doesn't know that his cure is part of the disease, is part of the problem. But again, either he doesn't know it or he knows it and he's simply lying about it. But it's one or the other. And of course, simply cutting spending isn't the only thing Congress can do. There are a lot of other things they can do, like repealing all the rules and regulations that are so undermining the recovery, that are making it harder to employ people, that are actually punishing businesses for hiring, that are imposing penalties, that are making people afraid to hire because they don't want the liability, they don't want the costs. Why don't we remove these burdens? The only thing that the government is talking about maybe is raising taxes. And who do they want to raise taxes on? Well, the very people that they want to create jobs. All the politicians are complaining that there's not enough jobs, yet their solution is to tax the job creators even more. Where does the government think that businesses get the money to create jobs? It's the money that they don't pay in taxes. It's the profits that are retained by business that the government doesn't take. So the more profits that the government takes, the less there is available to create jobs. And of course, the more money the government takes from the job creators, the less incentive those people have to work and produce. So no, Ben Bernanke, cutting spending too quickly is not a threat. The threat is not cutting spending and not cutting it enough. The more they cut it, the better. And what we need from you, Ben Bernanke, is some sound money. Instead of just being an engine for inflation and enabling the growth of government, why don't you do something to put an end to that growth? Why don't you act responsibly, raise interest rates, refuse to monetize government debt, and force the government to do the right thing instead of continually enabling them to do the wrong thing, and then you scratch your head at a confusion. You don't understand why the economy is weakening, but now you're confident it's just going to magically get better. What you really should do is resign, acknowledge that you don't understand what's going on, and maybe, just maybe, we can replace you with somebody who does, although, of course, there's that old saying, the devil you know. Anyway, on that note, hopefully you enjoy the rest of the weekend, and we will be back again next week with more comments.